Hello everyone. I believe I am ready. I have my water, my slides that I will be looking off of on my computer, and I chose this place to present because of the painting just behind me, which I thought was a nice touch to the background. It will also give you guys something to look at instead of just looking at my face or having my face to stare at. I would like to begin by welcoming you all to my talk on the Olweus Bullying Prevention Program. As we go through the presentation, I will say next slide when I want you to focus on the next slide or when I want you to move to the next slide. And on that note, let's begin. Next slide. So, Dr. Dan Olweus is a professor at the University of Bergen in Norway. He conducted the very first studies on bullying in the 1970s, and because of that is now considered to be one of the founding fathers in this field. Dr. Olweus developed the Olweus Bullying Prevention Program in the 1980s, and this program has become one of the most widely studied and well-known interventions in the world. Next slide. The main objectives of this program are to reduce the existing bullying behavior among students, to prevent any future bullying behavior from happening, and to encourage positive peer relations at school. At this time, I'd like to stress that the intervention aims to reduce bullying, which is a subtype of aggression. So what is bullying? Next slide. I get dry mouth when I'm talking a lot. Anyways, we have just recently looked at bullying in class, but I will remind you what it is. Olweus described bullying as a repeated intentional negative behavior that is done by one dominant person, and it can be dominant physically or socially, and it's done onto the less dominant victim. Bullying has negative outcomes for both the victim and the bully. For example, bullies are more likely to develop behavioral problems and are more likely to end up in prison. On the other hand, victims are more likely to suffer from internalizing problems such as depression. Still, as we learn from Berger, bullying affects the whole classroom. Classrooms in which there is more bullying behavior occurring tend to have worse academic outcomes. Next slide. So the Olweus intervention program is comprehensive. It targets bullying at the level of the individual, the classroom, the school, and the community. Next slide. The school level components, and you can really begin to appreciate how comprehensive this intervention is just based on looking on this slide. The school level components include establishing a bullying prevention coordinating committee, and this committee is made up of individuals who are involved in various roles in the school and the community, and the committee has a responsibility to oversee the program and the implementation of it. The second level component is conducting a training for the committee and for all the school staff. This is to ensure that the bullying in the school is handled consistently and effectively. The third component is to administer the Olweus Bullying Questionnaire. This questionnaire serves two purposes. Firstly, some parents and teachers are skeptical about the problem of bullying inside the school. Often this questionnaire convinces them that there is in fact a problem. Second, this questionnaire acts as a baseline, which is useful in examining if the intervention is working later on down the road. The fourth component is to hold staff discussion groups, which can be useful in ironing out the wrinkles of the intervention program. The fifth component is to introduce school rules against bullying, and this serves to establish clear guidelines or boundaries between what kind of behavior is acceptable and what is not acceptable. The sixth component is to review and refine the school's supervisory system, which is to ensure that the children are being properly supervised. The seventh school level component is to hold a school-wide kickoff event to launch the program, and this is to create a dialogue about bullying with the school community. Finally, the eighth component is to involve the parents whenever it is possible. Next slide. The three classroom level components include posting and enforcing school-wide rules against bullying, holding regular class meetings with students to discuss bullying, and to involve parents in those meetings. Next slide. Individual level components. The individual level components of the school bullying include supervising student activities, ensuring that bullying is handled immediately by the staff, meeting with children who are involved in bullying separately with the bullies and the victims, meeting with the parents of any students who are involved in bullying, and if necessary, developing an individualized intervention plan for anyone who is involved in any kind of incident of bullying. Next slide. Finally, the community level components include involving the community members in the Bullying Prevention Coordinating Committee, developing school community partnerships which are meant to support the program, and to spread anti-bullying messages in the community. Next slide. The key principles that form the basis for the components that I have just briefly went over are important for establishing a good rapport with the children, setting limits, giving appropriate consequences, and being a positive role model. So before I move on, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Olweus bullying program training. So the prevention program training. First, a bullying prevention coordinating committee is formed, and it includes members of various groups that are associated with the school. So this can involve, for example, teachers, parents, administrators, leadership staff like principals, and so on. And these individuals experience bullying in very different ways and can offer many different kinds of perspectives, or many different perspectives on the bullying and also on the bullying intervention program. Members of this committee they must attend a 2-day training session that is conducted by a certified Olweus bullying prevention program trainer, And this trainer will be also responsible for providing a 1-year consultation and additional recommended trainings, like the follow-up after a year and any supplementary training. The members of the committees are then responsible for training the staff of the school. I found this program, or the Olweus Bullying Prevention Program, to be quite intensive, and with this slide I hope that I have showed you that it is quite intensive and it is quite comprehensive. Next slide. The evaluation criteria I chose to evaluate the Olweus intervention program includes reducing opportunities for incentives, or reducing opportunities or incentives and incentives for bullying, teaching classroom moral education, developing strategies to identify bullying and to safely intervene, and to take appropriate action when bullying occurs. I describe these four in more detail in the following slides. So, next slide. Why is it important to reduce opportunities and incentives for bullying? Well, Anderson and Bushman presented the general aggression model, which states that incentives could lead to acts of aggression or increased acts of aggression. When is it an opportune time to bully? Salmavali helps answer that question, as it was found that bullying often occurs in the presence of others where bullies can assert their dominance. Pozzoli and Gini found that incentives for bullying may be provided by the peer group. They have suggested that peers can act in ways that reinforce the bully and the bullying behavior. For example, they could cheer the bully on while he is bullying a victim, or they can be a silent observer, which has been found to be equally or at least reinforcing for the bully in some way. So how can these opportunities and incentives be reduced? And how is it accomplished by the Olweus program? Next slide. The Olweus program implements clear rules against bullying. These rules encourage helping others who are victims of bullying and encourages defending behavior in witnesses to bullying. Next slide. So, reducing opportunities and incentives for bullying can be achieved by creating a culture in which bullying is discouraged and defending is encouraged. When defending becomes the norm, the victim is no longer vulnerable, and the audience is no longer reinforcing the bully. Additionally, the effectiveness of the bullying gaining star status with his behavior is also diminished. Next slide. The second intervention evaluation criteria is teaching classroom moral education. This is important because, according to Fontaine, research suggests that children evaluate their decision to behave in certain so research suggests that children evaluate their decision to act in a certain way in terms of their socio-moral identity. In other words, if the behavior does not fit a child's social or moral norms or their own moral code, then the child is less likely to perform that behavior. Salmavali has shown that moral emotions such as empathy have also been linked to defending behaviors. Pozzoli and Gini provide support for this notion, as they also suggest that teaching children about how to be a moral agent, or about their role as moral agent, can also reduce bullying behaviors and increase defending behavior. Next slide. Although it is not explicitly mentioned, the classroom level component, where the teacher has regular meetings with their students about bullying, could be used to provide a moral education or empathy training. Implementing a moral education curriculum as part of the bullying intervention program may be an important component when implementing this program in low-income or at-risk communities. So, a study by Hong examined the feasibility of implementing the Olweus bullying prevention program in at-risk communities. And the authors suggested that children who come from these communities can pose a challenge to Olweus's program because of the circumstances they grew up in, such as having parents with addiction issues or violence issues, which lead to impaired empathic reactions. The Olweus program does not involve teaching a moral curriculum, which is surprising because it is so comprehensive. So I suggest that this may be a shortcoming to the program. Next slide. Although moral education may be an important component in increasing defending behavior, it would definitely be bolstered by increasing self-efficacy in defenders. This can be achieved by or through the third intervention evaluation criterion, which is teaching classroom strategies to identify bullying and safely intervene. Reducing pluralistic ignorance may also increase defender self-efficacy. Now, pluralistic ignorance refers to the common false belief that children and adolescents may have, where they believe that everyone supports the bully. So they believe the wrong thing. Finally, according to a study by Pozzoli, the act of defending improves the outcome for the victims, regardless of how successful that defending was. Next slide. The classroom meeting component of the Olweus prevention program serves this purpose, and that purpose is to increase the self-efficacy beliefs in defending behavior. These classroom meetings help students understand their role in preventing bullying, and they also provide opportunities for the students to solve ways in which they could address bullying when they encounter it. The discussions also increase cohesion among students and reduce pluralistic ignorance. Next slide. The final intervention evaluation criterion involves the immediate and appropriate response to bullying. We have learned that bullying is a form of proactive aggression, and that proactive aggression can vary in control and intent. We have also learned that bullying can occur for many reasons. It can occur because of somebody's appearance or their ethnicity, for example. So we can conclude that no two bullying incidents are alike. Therefore, authority figures are to take a case-by-case approach when assessing the incident. Appropriate responses will take into account the underlying reason for the bullying and the intent behind it. Next slide. So, the Olweus program accomplishes this with on-the-spot and follow-up interventions. The program ensures that bullying problems are handled quickly and effectively, and that the school staff have received the necessary training to do this, or to be able to do this. Next slide. Now we come to the question of whether or not the Olweus intervention is effective. Olweus and his colleagues have shown in a series of studies from Norway that this intervention program has effectively been able to reduce child-reported bullying and victimization. These figures that you see on this slide are taken from one of these Norwegian studies and show that each cohort decreases in reports of victimization and bullying behavior following an 8-month period. So the gray squares, or the sideways squares, they represent the baseline measures of the bullying and victimization reports, and the triangles represent the 8-month follow-up of these behaviors, or the 8-month follow-up on the levels of these behaviors. Next slide. So other studies have shown support for this intervention program as well. It includes a meta-analysis of intervention programs conducted by Toffee and Farrington. Next slide. At last, some studies do not support Olweus' earlier findings. So, although Bauer and his colleagues found an intervention effect for white students, there was no overall effect of the intervention, and there was no effect for children from minority backgrounds. Black and Jackson also found an effect using a measure of bullying incident density, which is a measure for live bullying observations over time. However, there was no effect observed with the Olweus bullying questionnaire, which is used in other studies to evaluate whether the intervention is working or not. Next slide. There are several challenges for the Olweus program. First of all, it is comprehensive and difficult to implement. Researchers have reported a resistance to the program by the school staff, cherry-picking of program components, and program burnout by the staff. And to me, these reports could be reflecting the difficulty teachers have with the actual implementation of the study. Still, one study has shown that implementing the Olweus program gets easier over time. This intervention is also time-consuming and expensive. This may pose a problem for schools trying to implement it, especially schools in at-risk communities. So at-risk neighborhoods, they offer other challenges in addition to the ones previously mentioned. These include limited resources, difficult environments to work in, and the limited potential for parental involvement. Next slide. In terms of evaluation criteria, several challenges exist as well. Reducing opportunities and incentives may be difficult in at-risk schools, as the culture may be difficult to change. Being tough or being a bully may be related to survival, or it may be a key for these children that they see that is important to their survival. The time it takes to teach moral education curriculum would compete with the time that is needed to teach the general curriculum. This is associated with added pressures of teachers having to have their classroom perform and achieve higher test scores. Developing classroom strategies may be difficult if teachers do not believe that this is important or are not convinced that there is a bullying problem in their school. Additionally, gender differences in bullying behavior make it difficult to determine which strategies are the most important. Finally, taking appropriate action may be challenging in at-risk schools, where the staff tend to be less qualified, and intervening is much more stressful and dangerous. Next slide. I believe that the Olweus program is too comprehensive and overwhelming for teachers to implement. It is a program that requires a lot of money and effort. Furthermore, although I do not want to give my thoughts until our discussion over Moodle, but perhaps important ideas related to bullying were not addressed, and I'll touch on these in the following slide. Lastly, even though it is difficult, comprehensive, and expensive to implement, perhaps this is the reason why it's so effective at reducing bullying. So, I want to now turn to the discussion questions I have for us and turn to the next slide. These are the discussion questions that I want to discuss, and I was hoping to do so over Moodle over the next week. So the first question is, are comprehensive interventions better than less comprehensive intervention, but more efficient interventions? Sorry, I'll repeat that question. Are comprehensive interventions better than less comprehensive but more efficient interventions? Are the lack of focus on moral education and bystanders a shortcoming to this intervention program? And finally, if you are a leader of a school district, would you commit your staff to the Olweus bullying prevention It's a mouthful. I'm sorry. Would you commit your staff to the Olweus bullying prevention program? Anyways, thank you for listening. That is it for my presentation. The following slides include the references. Thank you for listening once again. Bye.